Hi everybody, welcome to Wellingtone's latest 18-minute webinar. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about one of the dark arts of project management, which is learning from projects. And as we know, and as you probably know, we're really good at identifying lessons and learnings, but we tend to not be very good at actually learning from them. So what we're going to do today is explore a little bit about that. And we're going to extend the typical lessons learned conversation and talk a little bit more about knowledge management and how lessons learned fits into the wider context of knowledge management, which might give us some clues as to why we find it so difficult to learn from projects. For those of you that aren't familiar with us, we are Wellingtone. We are a project management consultancy firm. We're based in the UK, in Windsor, and we have offices in Dublin and also Madrid in Spain. We've been around for 20 years, and our mission is to enable our clients to make a transformational change or make a step change in their project management maturity. And we do that with trusted partners, as well as a variety of different types of services. So we are a technology partner with Microsoft. We are a Microsoft Gold partner when it comes to project management. We also do consultancy. We have our Wellingtone Academy full of all sorts of training courses, focusing on various disciplines from the project management practice. We also run conferences and events. We have our annual conference next year, so hopefully some of you will be attending that. And we do annual research, and we do lots of articles and insights through our work with the associations for project management. My name is Emma Arnaz-Pemberton. I'm the Director of Consulting Services, and I'm a PMO specialist by trade. And as I've mentioned, we work very closely with the associations for project management here and abroad. For Wellingtone, I look after sustainability and corporate social responsibility, and that means that I get to work with loads of really cool organisations who are trying to bring kind of project management and social good closer together. And I organise our future PMO event, which is happening next week. So you can follow me and Wellingtone if you scan that QR code, and you can find me on social media if you search for PMO Ninjas. So let's get into these 18 minutes of knowledge. First of all, we need to understand why knowledge management is important. We need to learn when to gather the lessons, when is actually the right time, and that's going to help us uncover what tools can actually help us to do that. And then we're going to see different ways to use those lessons so that we can actually improve our project management practice. So first of all, we'll just give you some perspectives from one of our networking events. So at Wellingtone, as part of this community, we run networking events. We don't record those because they are designed to have a conversation within them through all the attendees. And this one was really interesting from one that when we talked about knowledge management and learning from lessons. And what we can see here are kind of two separate pieces of information. One is kind of the colours that go upwards in the graph, really identifying and letting us know if people are identifying lessons learned. And we can see that the majority do. Sometimes if we need to, it's in our methodologies, and we have rarely. So if the team are up to it, if we're not, going off onto the next new shiny thing. What's interesting is what we've done here is cut the data with, do we actually learn from those lessons? So again, the majority is like, yeah, if we need to, and if it's been really painful, we might try to learn from that. But we can see that it's still not a discipline that we take 100% seriously, and certainly we don't see it as a strategic activity within our project management practice. So we've still got a way to go, and hopefully today we'll give you some insights on what to do within your reality. So as I mentioned, one of the first things that we need to do to get rid of the crutch of lessons learned is to talk a little bit about knowledge management and how we extend that conversation. Now, to do that, we need to understand what knowledge management is. And there's some research that says it's about knowledge management is any process or practice that helps us to create, acquire, capture, share, and use knowledge, wherever it might be, to help our organizations and become better, as well as to enhance learning within that organization. Now, those of you that might have done some of the courses in our PMO Academy, you will remember that one of our Wellingtone PMO principles is supporting a learning organization. So we need to get better at organizational knowledge, as opposed to just focusing in on the one activity of lessons learned. If we look at this definition, it's creating, acquiring, capturing, sharing, and using knowledge wherever it might be. That means that some of it might be in documents, some of it might be in logs, some of it might be in people's heads, some of it might be in like physical machinery, the way that we've set things up and the way that we run our processes. So straight away we can see that knowledge management kind of forces us to look at lessons learned from a much wider perspective. If we look at knowledge according to the Oxford Dictionary, they say that knowledge can be defined as facts, information, and skills acquired through experience or education. It's theoretical or practical. It's kind of the sum of what is known. In some cultures, we see knowledge as a justified true belief. And this is very interesting and important because the concept of knowledge and the knowledge that I have is based on what I believe to be true. So although we can see in that definition that it's not just facts and information, it's also the skills that we acquire. It's practical or theoretical. And because of that, people have a wide variety of knowledge within them that isn't just made of what they learned at university or college or with any vocational course. It's about how they then utilize that knowledge to gain that experience to really understand the subject. In business, and knowing that our truth depends on any given perspective or system of belief, then when we look at knowledge from a business context, we quite often talk about it as intellectual property and product innovation. So we use that concept of knowledge as organizations as a source of economic competitiveness to really set us apart from people who are doing something similar to us. And because of that, that is another example that knowledge is socially constructed. It's based on what knowledge we know within this building, what experiences we have and have had in the past, what knowledge we bring in, how we teach our people, and how we then innovate with what we do. Fundamentally, knowledge comes in two forms. First is what we call codified knowledge. And codified knowledge is anything that can be recorded or transmitted, usually in the form of symbols. So writings, drawings, and effectively embodied in something tangible that we can use, like documents and systems that we can go back and check on that knowledge and see if it can help us. And we're quite good at this, I think, within projects. We would most of the time see that kind of, what did we learn? What should we do differently next time? What was really painful? What went particularly well? The next is what we call tacit knowledge. And this is knowledge that is not quantifiable. It's quite often in people's heads, is based on experience and learning behaviors and ways of doing things. And quite often people say, oh, it's just kind of know-how. It's difficult for us to explain. A good example of this is, for those of you that know how to ride a bicycle, if I said to you, tell me to teach me how to ride a bicycle, that's a very difficult thing to do, because when you ride a bicycle, you just do it. It's tacit knowledge that's in your head, and you understand what processes you need to go through to stand up and start pedaling and stay upright. So that's a good example of tacit knowledge, is the things that we find difficult to explain, to teach in any way without having to do things in a practical sense. And this knowledge is maybe the most valuable in our organizations and the least tapped into. So I always use an example in my training courses of, like, everybody has a Bob in their organization. So Bob has been around for years. He knows all the ins and outs. He's got a great network. He knows how everything works. He's got all the memories of everything that's happened. So everybody wants Bob to work on their projects because he knows everything and everyone and can make things happen just based on the tacit knowledge that's in Bob's head. Now, getting that knowledge out, as you can imagine, we need to really think about how we do that. There isn't one machine to be able to really kind of show and demonstrate that tacit knowledge. So we need to really focus in on, yeah, we're quite good at codifying what's obvious, but what about the less obvious stuff? And it's really hard. And this is, again, something from our networking event It is difficult. It is considered one of the dark arts in the PMO world and the project management world of how do we actually learn and acquire and utilize that knowledge. And these are some of the reasons why people told us that they find it very difficult. So the biggest one, as you can see, is time. The bigger the word, the more times people said it effectively. Time is key. We're all time poor. So what often happens is projects finish and we don't have time before we start the next thing to be able to spend a couple of hours sitting down with the team and kind of chewing the fat on what went well, what didn't go quite well, what do we need to learn. So time is the biggest thing. Resources, very closely linked to that. You know, people get busy and are busy and need to move on to the next thing that needs delivering. It's not seen as a priority. It isn't seen as a strategic thing that we should be doing to close our projects in a controlled fashion. So we need to really think about that in conjunction with kind of the appetite and the engagement of it as well. How do we get people to sit in a room and talk to us about the things that didn't go particularly well? What's interesting here, and the reason why I put this slide up, is a few things came out of that conversation that I have often thought about and believed, but never really kind of seen it from anybody else. And one of them, the two that we can see are both kind of facing upwards, is ego and fear. And this is really interesting because I've always believed that the reason we're not good at learning from lessons and really sharing is those two things. First of all, the fear of being caught out, the fear of, oh, well, if I say this, then it's going to somehow come back, might somehow come back to me and make it seem like I've missed something or I haven't done something. So I do believe that that stops people from being open and honest about the things that we need to be better at. And the other is ego, and we see this in the psychological world a lot. You know, we protect ourselves, and our ego doesn't often let us say, "Oh yes, no, I missed that," or "the process isn't quite right that I built." So we need to consider the human condition when we're thinking about that wider piece of knowledge management and how we can deal with that. I had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman who had recently retired about a particular thing that he used to do, and I'd asked him for some advice. And he said to me, "Oh, yes, I can give you all of this information. Now that I've retired, there's no risk to me." And that's, again, something quite critical in all of this is, are people then keeping the knowledge to themselves because they believe that that keeps them in a job, keeps them current, keeps them interesting, keeps people coming back to them to ask for help? And it was fascinating to hear, you know, now I've retired, I can tell you all this information and all the kind of trade secrets almost. So we have to consider not just the mechanics of the project, but also that human condition and how we engage with that. So if we break that down into the thing that we always talk about in projects is lessons learned. So we talk about lessons learned through Prince 2 around this is how teams learn from experience. We seek them, we record them, and we act upon them. And as we know, we're not great at acting upon them. One interesting point here is that this says we should be doing it throughout the life of the project. So in that context, we're already doing it wrong in many cases because we do lessons learned at the end of the project, just before we close. But what we should be doing is, when starting a project, is have we done something similar in the past? Are there any current initiatives that could help us to understand what not to do? And speaking to pertinent colleagues, so the Bobs of the world. I always say, before you start a project, call 3 people. Call 3 people to find out, have we done this before? What was painful last time? What did we learn? What should I avoid? To really understand how lessons can help us to start in a positive way. As the project progresses, we need to make lessons part of the day job. So at the end of every meeting, have we learned anything this week? Is there anything we need to change? And interestingly, agile teams do this often. They do it at the end of each sprint. Is there a way that we can work better together? Has something failed that we need to think about? We need to engage our project team managers, and we need to use a lessons learned log. We need to write this stuff down. And then as the project closes, we need to hold that workshop. We need to centrally store this information, and we need to analyze that information to understand if there's a trend. If we're always having the same issue with the same supplier or the same department, then there's an opportunity there to fix that. If we don't do lessons learned, we find ourselves making the same bad decisions over and over and over. And I'm sure we've all been in that situation where it's like, oh, this again, I've been here, I've got this t-shirt and I don't want to go through it again. So I'm sure we've all had that experience at some point where we kind of just feel like we're trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, which is the definition of insanity. It forces us then to duplicate work and effort, because actually, if we learn from previous projects, it would really actually potentially stop us having to rebuild everything from scratch, because we can start from where they left off or from the areas that they managed to fix. And with that comes waste and the reduced chances of success, and stakeholders become unengaged because, oh, I've been here before, I've done this, it's not going to work. And even losing team members, people who don't want to be involved. There are benefits to doing lessons learned, and we have some of those here, you know, providing the information to consider for brand new projects. It can really help us to stop projects that are not going in the right way, that are not going to achieve their benefits. It helps us to speak to people to understand what would you do differently, and it will always just help us to think smarter. In the context of project management, there are lots of things that help us with that. So risks and issues can really help us to identify and deal with lessons. You know, how have we mitigated our risks? Why did risks become issues? Looking at our planning and estimating processes, were we accurate? Do we have metrics that are going to help us in the future? Methods and tools. Have we used a methodology? Was it effective? Can we learn from it not being effective or being particularly effective? How can we improve it? Looking at the life cycle, was it appropriate? How many change requests did we get, which is starting to tell us that there's something there that we maybe need to look into? And other information, is there anything else that we should be, maybe in our project closure report, that we should be potentially identifying as a lesson? So it doesn't have to be a one-off activity that takes up loads of time, because we have tools that really help us to have this conversation all throughout the project. There are some key roles and responsibilities. So typically the project manager will manage the log. They'll take responsibility for escalating any trends and opportunities, and they'll produce that lessons learned report. The PMO will own the processes, tools, the communication, that kind of centralized view. It will review all the closure reports to ensure that they're also looking for trends. They will help with archiving of lessons, and both for information but also for recall in the future. And then project sponsors also have a role in this, and many sponsors don't feel like they do, but they should provide a summary from a sponsor's perspective. They have to balance the risk of the project with the risk of the business. So they should have a view on this. They should look at the closure report. They should feed into this conversation, and particularly if we don't achieve our benefits after the project is finished. Those tools kind of that can really help us. So most of us have a form of a RAID, a tool designed to kind of help us log risks, actions, issues, dependencies. Sometimes we add decisions into there as well, and it helps us on a day-to-day basis to flag things that maybe we can do differently. That closure report we've just talked about, really kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty of what have we learned along the way, and then creating that or putting all that information into that kind of central space, really making sure that we can search for that and we can find information in the future. Now, one of the things that we have to do in order to consider gathering this information is mostly anyway, is to do some kind of workshop. And we always say, like, work with these 10 rules, introduce them before you start the workshop, before you start getting into it, you know, decide who is the best person to facilitate. Sometimes the project manager shouldn't be the facilitator. It's not about capability. Make it really clear from the start. It's not about pointing fingers. One of the ways to do it is to talk through each project stage, discuss how did we communicate, open the logs that we have, find the positives. Lessons are positive and negative. You know, if we've had a pizza party and it worked really well to engage people, then let's do that for every project. So identify areas for praise as well, and make sure that we get the right people in the room, or we give them an opportunity to engage with us. And then the critical thing is, okay, we do all of that, what happens next? So we need to make sure that we categorize our lessons into, we recommend 3 separate areas. So the most of your lessons, so maybe 85% of your lessons, are going to be in the roam-free category. So they're kind of inconsequential to the wider business context, and they're really left in the closure report and the logs to support projects in the future. If we try and do something similar, then this is a searchable database, so we should be able to then go back and see that. Maybe 10%, 8%, 12% of your lessons are going to be what we would class as important enough to be published. So we want to communicate these for public consumption. We want to put them on our PMO hub, intranet, whatever we have, and we want to communicate with those involved to say, we've learned something. And this is important for you to know, that that pain that you felt, we've done something with that. And then maybe 5 to 7% of your lessons are going to be what we would class really, really significant. These are the things we never want to feel that again. And we would call that locked down, and we would normally work that into a case study so that we can have that for the future. Now, don't overthink the word case study. People sometimes think, oh, wow, I've got to write like a whole dissertation, and that's not the case. 2 slides, 1 slide, some bullet points of what happened, why it happened, what have we done about it. It doesn't need to be a big onerous task, so don't overthink case study. This is important, having these 3, because the majority of your lessons aren't going to need a case study. They're not going to need lots of communication, but you will have them there as knowledge within that knowledge base for people to recall and update and search for and look at. And that's when we move from lessons learned to knowledge management and actually managing the knowledge that comes from our projects. The biggest risk to this is commitment, because at some point we've got to sit down maybe once a quarter and we have to review our lessons and give them categories and then do the work. And it's always one of the first things that goes away when we get busy. So for me, the biggest lesson for dealing with knowledge management and starting to move that needle to actually say we are doing some knowledge management, we are supporting our organization to learn, is to commit to this. Interestingly, in our research, we always ask the question of what are the things that are really difficult for your organization to embed, and knowledge management always comes out in the top 5. But when we ask senior leaders, what are the most valuable things that your project and PMO people could do for you, knowledge management comes out in the top 5. So that one of the things that we are not doing is one of the things that is perceived to be incredibly valuable. So use the stuff from today, start that conversation, and commit to actually recording and storing and being able and recalling the information and being able to share it as well. So thank you all for joining. I know you're all very busy and it's lunchtime, and I hope we've given you some insights into the world of knowledge management, and we hope to see you very soon. Thank you very much for attending.